If I had to describe my aesthetic interests outside of just anime, I would have to pinpoint the vibrant and kinetic comic look of Scott Pilgrim vs. the World and the caricature to all hell designs from Ed, Edd n Eddy. Suffice to say, Psychonauts overall scratches a lot of itches for what I find visually baller in a video game. The 2021 sequel manages to upscale the Muppet adjacent cast for next-gen hardware, but also goes above and beyond when it comes to representing the new minds you explore throughout the game. Levels like the Psyking Sensorium oversaturate colors to evoke not just 60s psychedelia, but also the intensity of sensation Psyking's panic attacks have on him, which you also help him overcome throughout the level. Cassie's collection represents one of the former Psychonauts founders through the archetypes she had developed throughout her life, each one a paper sketch representative of these points that try and cohabitate the grand library that is her psyche. The cinematography also works hard to highlight the ways brain logic might not lend itself to the rules we consider physical space, seamlessly transitioning between main character Raz standing at a doorway, to only then fall through and end up in nightmarish geometry or a gauntlet against the mind's internal sensors. Psychonauts 2 does a lot to clean up the presentation of its core mechanics to better suit game flow in the current age, but that doesn't stop the team at Double Fine from pushing the boundary to create something still visually fascinating and emblematic of an aesthetic so many people have been waiting to make a comeback.
From the very first time you see a trailer for Inscription, you're most likely either immediately hooked or, at the very least, a little bit intrigued. It boasts a unique visual style paired with really exceptional audio design, and a score that sets a tone fitting of a game where you're trapped in a cabin with a madman who's forcing you to play a card game he made up. It's not just one element of Inscription's aesthetic that stands out so well. All of it comes together effortlessly to draw you into the mystery, and if you're an absolute freak like me, eventually into a strange, multiple-century spanning ARG. Almost every little element of Inscription feels considered. From the large, hard-to-ignore text backed with the unnaturally synthesized mumblings of each character, the individual tokens carved out of bone dropping next to your playboard, to the velcro-y sounds of the hides slowly being ripped off the bodies of animals and the music for the Trapper's boss fight. Every detail helps fit you in this world. Not only is Inscription successful at employing sound so well, it's also great in its utilization of a lack of sound. There are so many moments where you're sitting there quietly, the only sounds being the shuffling of cards on your board, and you're left with your thoughts considering your next move. The twang of a folksy guitar and a minor key will kick in, and you're simply left there in the moment, absorbing the space as it's laid out so carefully in front of you. Inscription doesn't just have a unique visual style, however, it has three. Inscription's different acts shift into almost entirely different games, tethered by the same well-constructed card game, and each one is a treat to absorb. While its middle chapter is certainly derivative of a lot of similar trading card games, it still sticks out with a really solid soundtrack of its own, including some great remixes of songs you may have already heard, on top of top-notch audio cues. The one that plays when you sacrifice a monster is burned into my brain. Even if you don't play Inscription, which you absolutely should, I highly recommend at least watching some gameplay. You gotta see this thing.
When Natsuko Ishikawa took over writing duties for the main story of Final Fantasy XIV, there was an immediate and incredible increase in quality. While the narratives of Heavensward and Stormblood had been well received and acclaimed, Shadowbringers took things to an entirely different level that represented not only a push past the surface level political aesthetics that the game had drowned itself in, but also an incredible attention to detail and character work that made a game of various threads and ideas into a grand tapestry where each thread feeds into the next. Endwalker uses a narrative approach heavily reliant on retroactive foreshadowing, a technique that utilizes the bedrock of what's come before as setup for new stories to be built from. New characters are built out of the ideas and inklings established years and years before in some offhanded comment or tertiary world building. Old characters are refined and improved to become an ideal version of themselves, with one-note characters like Estinian, the moody dragoon from Heavensward, becoming a crucial and stalwart friend who's really bad at managing money, and leaves your room by jumping out the window because he's kind of a freak. The story of Final Fantasy XIV has always been disconnected and patchwork because of its unfortunate conception, but to see it not only be molded into an interesting story, but a rare testament to what long-running games can actually meaningfully do with their overall experiences is nothing short of incredible. There's a line in the song Answers, written by the writer of Final Fantasy XIV's disastrous 1.0 launch, and the English localization lead has only become more involved over time. Look to those who walked before, to lead those who walk after. While Answers was initially used as a cool thing to play in the background of a cinematic, and a cool thing to fight series regular Bahamut to, Endwalker actually managed to utilize the song nearly 10 years later to reflect the core thesis of its narrative, while representing exactly the path the development team has taken over and over again. You don't just forget the past, you learn from them, build off it, and remember.
What else can I say about Disco Elysium? I don't know yet if it will always be my absolute number one game of all time, but I can confidently say it will remain in my top 5 for the rest of my life. Top 5 of anything. If it has 1 million fans, I am one of them. If it has 10 fans, I am one of them. If it only has 1 fan, that is me. If it has no fans, that means I'm dead. You get it. What I have not already said about it amounts to this. Disco Elysium was a genuine groundbreaker when it was released in 2019, and the final cut polished the hell out of it. From the writing, to the art, to the music, to the belatedly added full suite of voice acting, every person involved in the making of it are the brightest stars handpicked out of the night sky. Because of all that, and because I did not play it through until the final cut released last year, so technically it counts, Disco Elysium is my game of 2021.
Samus Aran is not known for doing normal things. Most of her power comes from a mix of technological, terrestrial, and chemical mishaps. Like if a sentient 8th grade science volcano was asked to save the galaxy on a regular basis. While it's been a cool trick, the routine has become stale, leaving casual players still asking very normal questions like, why does Samus always start without any powers? Isn't she supposed to be a legendary fighter? Why is Samus always so powerless before pillaging the ruins of some long-dead planet looking for the ancient algae to shove into her arm cannon? Nintendo has finally allowed the Metroid series to progress forward by letting Samus start with a tool that builds her as a character as well as helps modernize the conservatively designed series as a whole. The parry mechanic in Metroid Dread is not only an extremely powerful tool that helps quickly dispose of enemies, but also the special visuals and sounds that go with it are hype as hell, and its use as a bonus life against the one-hit kill Emmy robots makes Samus look like a total never-say-die badass. It's the last piece of Metroid Dread's puzzle that keeps Samus looking so fluid and strong through her myriad movement options. The parry has grown from something that was a chore to use in Samus Returns for the 3DS to becoming an inextricable part of the Metroid formula. Metroid games are not known for being normal. The most common way to play them is abnormally, by breaking the game's mechanics and sequencing to some extent. With this parry mechanic, however, there's now a side-scrolling Metroid game that is just as fun to play the normal way as it is with all the skips and breaks the series is known for. It's such a normal thing, you'd think Samus always had this power inside her.
The underground in the original Diamond and Pearl was already not much of a feature. You could dig up extra evolution stones, fossils, and other assorted knickknacks, but the best aspect, to me at least, was getting Spirit Tomb through interactions you had there. Sure, it wasn't particularly compelling, making you speak to 32 people in the underground before the Pokemon would appear elsewhere, but it was pretty easily cheesed by exiting and entering the underground over and over, as each visit was considered a separate person. With online connectivity becoming the norm instead of a luxury, you'd think these connections would be made easier and Spiritomb made a simpler get. That's not the case. Instead, you must now track down 32 separate NPCs in the Underground, who spawn at random rates and in even more random locations. There isn't even an option to speak to other players online, even though you can watch them rush all around you. As the Underground expands while you progress in the overworld, you cannot get Spiritomb until the post-game, unless you're willing to spend hours upon hours resetting spawn points for these NPCs, and even then it's all up to luck no matter how much of the area is available. The Spiritomb unlocking mechanic is a snapshot of how frustrating Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl are, where a simple fix with more modern hindsight is ignored in favor of a baffling new concept that makes the game worse to play.
I fail to come up with a word to describe Neo the World Ends With You that doesn't just bring me back to surprising. Given Square Enix's recent track record, this game shouldn't exist. It feels like we should have just accepted that tiny bit of representation back in Dream Drop distance as good enough. However, that's not the only surprise when it comes to the sequel of a fairly beloved DS game from 14 years ago. Gameplay has been revamped to better suit current-gen consoles while still maintaining an energy as kinetic as flicking your DS stylus on the bottom screen while fat-thumbing the face buttons to keep a combo up. The music maintains the energy of the original while also delivering so many new bangers that drive the themes of the series home effortlessly. New protagonists, Rindo and Fret, do a lot in terms of giving a voice to a new generation of teens who, while constantly online, still echo the loneliness that made Neku equal parts frustrating to witness, but understandable in terms of where that rage came from. That's also putting aside the rest of the cast who bring so much life to the streets of Shibuya. I can go on about each individual aspect of this game, but it all serves to highlight the fact that I couldn't have expected a sequel to The World Ends With You. I couldn't have expected a sequel that happily makes its audience fall in love with new characters, mechanics, visuals, and sounds. I couldn't have expected this game to leave such an impact on me months after my initial playthrough. Neo The World Ends With You could have easily been a throwaway sequel that made me look for a new DS and pay more money than I'd like to replay the original. Instead, it's easily one of the best games I've played this year, and has managed to reignite the series in a way I could never have thought of first listening to Twister all those years ago.
Chicory is a game I needed to experience in the way that I did and in all the manners that I saw myself in it. Around some point late in 2021, I was going through a period of artistic burnout, when I was struggling to take the steps to finally admit that to myself at that point in time. I was playing this game that did not hold back in depicting these very same issues under a very sweet surface. In Chicory, you quickly gain an understanding that the titular character herself is undergoing these similar stressors, and on your own journey of taking on her mantle, you inevitably meet her in the middle to help her on a path to recovery. Although I wish I'd had an adorable cartoon dog to pep talk me in a climatic boss battle to tell me everything was going to be okay, Chicory's ability to portray a very specific type of pain that can be difficult to describe that I and many others saw ourselves was reassuring. And it was clear that the game was written from a place of vulnerability and genuine experience. In every aspect that Chicory succeeds through its freeform paintbrush mechanic, solid writing, and general cuteness, its portrait of imposter syndrome and the various insecurities that come coupled with it are respectfully portrayed. To merely praise the game for its colorful poppy surfaces misses all the layers behind the work that it truly is. Because even in the worst hours of our self-loathing while an unfinished canvas collects dust in our rooms, Chicory reminds us that you do not have to endure it all alone.